Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Anytime that you lose wind out of your sails or you lose momentum in life, there is a tendency and a temptation in all of us to blame. Your best bet to put wind back in your sails is to own your piece of the past. So in the very beginning, the Lord commanded the man, saying, "From any tree of the garden you may freely eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." And they faced a temptation that I think all of us face today. Did God really say? And they gave in. It says, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, and he said, 'Where are you?' He says, 'Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? The woman you put here, God, with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it.'" You can blame your way into the future. You just can't blame your way into a better future. There's a connection, a relationship between clarity and purity. When you begin to go, "Hey, I'm going to own my piece of the past. I'm going to deal with what's really going on, the whole truth," it provides clarity, and it begins to put the wind back in your sails.
So I wanted to start off our time by acknowledging something that I thought was pretty funny this Sunday. And that was our last podcast. You talked about, you wanted me to talk about my beach moment where I sat on the beach and I had a moment with God, and you were like, you kind of...
I have a visual of you in that moment too.
Yeah.
I have a visual, like you're really present.
Well, what I wanted to acknowledge is that you started on Sunday talking about a moment of you sitting on a beach looking out at... I don't think I'm that unique. I think we all have those beach moments.
Yeah, see, I have a picture of you like on the beach, like, no chair, maybe just, hands up or something, like this very spiritual moment. For me, I'm on the beach. I have my beach chair. I have a beer in my hand. I'm sitting there. I've got, music playing, and I'm like, gosh, looking around and look at that creation going, God, this is so good right now. So...
yeah, no,
I just picture them different.
I think they're pretty similar, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So, mine would include umbrella above. There is a chair.
Oh, okay.
I'm always under the umbrella.
So you're not a sun guy?
I burn, man.
Do you really?
Yeah, even with sunscreen, I need to apply it like 3 or 4 times. I'm at the beach or else I burn.
No, do you get tan over time? Or
over time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Ashley doesn't need sunscreen. So she just goes and passes out in the sun. And so usually most of my moments with Jesus, she's like 5 feet away from me, just laying like asleep.
Getting baked.
And yes. And that is her happy place. She loves it. So
that's amazing.
But yeah, I hide. We have an umbrella always because I hide under the umbrella and I read my books and I write in my journal, and that's like the lamest beach thing ever.
You see, it's already, that's a different picture right there. See, that's what I picture. It's a very cool picture. That's why, you're just different from me, and it's maybe why I like you.
Yeah, that's nice. Anyway, when you opened up on Sunday, I was like, man,
see,
he he called me out, but no, it's true. I don't know, maybe it's the waves or something.
Yeah.
Something just brings you, I think that is it. I think when you look out at the waves, you're just like instantly reminded of how small you are.
Oh, 100%.
It just brings a lot of things into perspective, makes 100%. You think a little bigger.
Yeah.
Same
There's
with the
not
mountains.
computer screens and, demands and all this kind of, although, on the beach, especially with smaller kids, good Lord, the demands are high.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
now
we learned this last time.
Yeah. Well, you have to look forward to, as your kids get older, more independent. I mean, you and Ashley can just kind of hang out and watch them.
Yeah, but for the next 18 years probably, I'm going to be terrified they're going to go out too far in the water, all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think especially when they're younger. I remember when my boys were, I don't know, they were in Life Vest, and I'm sitting there watching them float out in the ocean. And at some point, there's this you're kind of going should I go now? Should I not? Should I go now? Are they okay? Are they not? Should I go now?
Yeah.
And they're all flapping and having fun, but all of a sudden there's this little subtle moment of panic. And then you're thinking about riptides and all these kind of things. And I've done a couple runs. I've done I think they're panicking. and I just full sprint it.
Full sprint out there into the water.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I go
That's
rescue them.
terrifying.
But they're in a life jacket, so
Yeah.
I still feel pretty good.
Yeah.
That's when they were younger.
Yep.
And they only did the life jacket when they would go out.
Yep.
You know, they'd be, I don't know, 20 feet in the water. Good,
Yeah.
but
I had no moments on the beach the last time we went with Grayson. There was not a single moment.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, in the mornings, I would strap him to me because he's up early and let Ashley sleep in. I'd strap him to me and we go walk on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
Last time that was nice, but
That's cool.
Yeah, no, he was. It was funny when we were like sitting and we've got our friends are with us and their kids are playing and the sandcastles and all that stuff. We could not get him to like kind of chill a little bit, and then as soon as we carry him out into the water to where we're like waist deep a little bit, and we're just holding him, and he's just like
Sleeps.
just passes out.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple times we'd go out into the water, and then I think just the waves, the movement, just like put him right to sleep.
That'd be nice.
So I was like, he's gonna be so excited, have so much fun, like dad expectations, and then he's just like, he's just totally out.
Well, that's one way. Yeah.
Anyways, so you started off that way. We kicked off a new series called Wind in Your Sails, and
Yes.
Such a great just concept series. We all at some point in our life, whether it's our spiritual life, marriage, parenting, financial, I mean, so many different aspects. We get stuck, or we just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're trying to get some wind in our sails, some momentum, some movement again. And this is seasonal, and different things happen. A lot of people talk about wind in their sails in their marriage when they've got young kids, and that's like a really big season where it's hard to have wind. So, this series is all about getting wind back in your sails, and I thought you started it in a great way because a lot of times it is in order to move forward, you have to go back first. And so the idea was, I guess in a lot of ways, if we're going to keep the analogy alive, the idea was if we're going to recognize that we need wind in our sails, we've got to recognize that we're the ones that are driving the ship. And we have to change something about us.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole blame thing came in. And oftentimes we're pointing our fingers at other people. Well, we need to actually look in the mirror and do something different if we're going to get wind in our sails. And
we did. I mean, part of our message prep before we kicked off the series, I mean, part of the tension was, where do we start?
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about this. Like, do we start? There's all kinds of aspects that takes the wind out of our sails, and there's all kinds of things that puts the wind in our sails. And so, I love that we did start with, we're going to talk about it a lot in the series, but we did start with us, and I think that's really, really important.
Yep, for sure. And you talked specifically about the past, and you said that what we have to do is own the piece of the past, and that's going to give us peace with our past if we own it, right? And so I want to start off and say, the first question I want to jump into is just, what if we don't know our piece of the past? We can't see our part. We don't think we have a part. We're struggling to figure out, what does that look like for us? What would you say?
Yeah, I think, I've shared this before. A mentor of mine a long time ago said, Buck, it's not your weakness that's going to get you. It's not your strength that's going to get you in life. In other words, take the wind out of your sails. It's your blind spots. So the things you're not aware of, the things you have a lack of self-awareness about, that's really what's going to get you in life. That's going to take the wind out of your sails. So I think that's why we're starting here. It's really important to begin to understand, what am I bringing to this equation? What am I bringing to this relationship, or this financial, mess that I'm in, or this, parenting mess in my son or daughter, or whatever, or dating mess, or whatever kind of thing that we're in. And I think it's important because, as I alluded to on Sunday, if we don't identify the things that we're bringing to the piece of the past, we end up smuggling those. And the danger with smuggling those, and I didn't get into this much on Sunday, is I said, if, say, you and I have this big relational beef, and 90% is your fault, like you really hurt me, but 10% is something I did. 10% was, maybe a couple, the words I chose, or, my 10% was my insecurities, and so I wasn't honest with you because I really wanted you to like me, or something like that. And so if I don't end up owning that 10%, I smuggle that into my current, so whoever, if we're no longer friends, then my current friendship, which will impact my future friendship. So now I'm bringing those insecurities and those harsh words that I used with you into my present relationships. The danger with that is if I look back on our relationship that maybe, say, is broken, and I don't acknowledge my piece, then all of a sudden I tell a narrative of what happened between Jeremy and I tell it over and over from a macro level. People tell me, oh, Buck, that's a terrible story. Gosh, Jeremy was so mean to you. We feel so bad for you. And then I tell it again, and I tell it again at a macro level. And before long, because of the empathy and the sympathy, and people are saying, man, Buck, you're so amazing. I mean, you were the right one in that whole thing. I begin to believe 100% of the story is my narrative. And now I lock away my insecurities and I locked away my words that I was responsible for. Like that was my piece of the past. And I almost permanently bring those now into my future friendships and future relationships. And that is a real, real danger because now you're locking in a blind spot in your relationships or whatever category of life. And that's why it's so important. Like if you don't become aware of this, if you don't own your piece of the past, if you don't do the work, the danger is you lock it in. And now all of a sudden, and you convince yourself of a lie. Because it is 100% their fault. It is 100%, the market's fault or my boss's fault or whatever it is.
Yep.
That's a really, really dangerous place to be. And then, as I alluded to on Sunday, then round and round you go.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, like your second marriage, your third marriage, all of a sudden, this next chapter with your kids, this next financial thing is like, it's the same thing.
Yep. Well, I mean, the finances are probably the easiest example to point out because nobody expects. I don't know. I guess if I'm not an economist, so I'm just gonna don't take these words and quote them.
Okay.
But recession and what we're experiencing right now. But we all know that we should be prepared for those things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so often we might find ourselves without wind in our sails financially. But the reality is, if we weren't prepared for this event, that's not our fault, but it is our fault that we weren't prepared for it in a lot of ways, with the way we spend money and stuff. So it's like the only way we become prepared for the next time is we own the fact that we weren't prepared this time. Yeah. In a lot of ways, right?
Right. And it's going deeper on that too, to go, I wasn't prepared because of my greed. So what is greed all about? Why did I have greed? Why did I get far too aggressive? Why did I invest too much in the market? Why did I keep investing when I knew the downtrend, whatever that is?
Why did I not build an emergency fund?
Right.
That kind of thing.
Why did I prioritize this versus, and it's just, it's really hard to do that. But that's the piece that goes, man, I'm not saying the market is your fault. I'm not saying all the financial wind out of your sails is your fault. I'm just saying what part of it is your fault. And if you can do that, that's a game changer in life. It really does adjust your sails and put wind back in your sails, especially in future, endeavors.
Well, I was just thinking too, one of our values at Northpoint is we take extreme ownership. And the reason it's one of our values is because, we recognize that us as leaders, as teams, the only way we are going to move forward is if we take ownership for something that happens in our department or our team. Because as long as we're blaming, as long as we're abdicating responsibility, then we're not really going to get anywhere.
100%.
And the same is true with our life, our finances, our marriage, all spiritual life, all that kind of stuff. In a lot of ways, that's not a dogmatic statement, but in a lot of ways, that is true. So that's a great resource. If nobody's ever read, where we got the extreme ownership idea from was the book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Great listen, great read. If somebody's going like, what does it look like to own something? Like, what does it look like to own my piece? Or you're a business leader in the community.
Great
Extreme
book.
ownership is fantastic. So you alluded to it a second ago, but the extreme ownership piece, owning our piece of the past, is difficult. Why is it so hard for us to do this?
Well, there's a million reasons, but I think the one thing that pops in my mind like over and over, and I alluded to it on Sunday, is pride.
Yeah, you said it briefly, and they were like, but today we're going to wrap up here. And I was like, whoa, that's like a huge thing to unpack. Yeah, pride.
I think, pride is, I feel like it's foundational. And I actually wrote a definition down that I used in a series we did in 2015 called Killing It. And in the series, I just said, pride, a high or inordinate opinion of one's own dignity, worth, value, importance, merit, or superiority. And I think pride feels very much at the foundation of why it's so difficult to own our piece of the past, why it's so difficult to admit my wrongs, why it's so difficult to say, to apologize. It's pride is just mixed all in there.
Yeah. So if we're going to connect the dots here, we want wind in our sails. To get wind in our sails, we have to own something of our own, our piece of the past. If we're going to own something, we have to swallow our pride and become more humble. That's very difficult to do. So what do we do about the pride that gets in the way of us doing that?
Yeah, I think, I wrote a few things down in terms of just pride and some practical things along with it. I think, one, it's important to understand pride a little bit more. Pride is saying, those things about me, like my dignity, my worth, my value, my significance, all those kind of things, which are wonderful things in themselves. But when you get to the point to go, it's because of me, that's a slippery slope. And what I mean by that is like, look at my intellect, look at my hard work, look at my abilities, look at my, savviness in business, look at my leadership, look at my skills, look at me. Like all of this is because of me. Once you begin thinking that and feeling that and saying that in a kind of a habitual or repetitive way, you are on this slippery slope to pride. Because in part, again, it is true. I mean, you were the one who worked hard. You were the one who applied your intellect. You were the one who was savvy and made those decisions in business or with finances or whatever. That is in part to it. But that confidence and the end point saying, me, I did it. It was my abilities. It was my, hard work. All of a sudden, that is the fuel. That is the jet fuel for pride. And now all of a sudden, it's like, well, you're not going to tell me anything. Like, who are you to tell me this is the way the relationship went? Do you know how many relationships I manage throughout the day, throughout the week? I mean, and I manage those in phenomenal ways. So who are you to tell me anything? Yeah. I mean, who are you to tell me when it comes to finances? That's my whole life. Or who are you to tell me when it comes to parenting? Like, look at everything, And all of a sudden, it's because me. The switch happens when we give credit to God, dependence upon God to go, oh, and there's a great passage in the scriptures that said, who gave you those hands? Who gave you, your abilities? Who gave you your intellect? Who allowed you to be born in your time and places? Who knit you together in your mother's womb? When we start there and it moved from me to God, you have given me these gifts. You have given me my value. My intrinsic value and worth doesn't come from my bank account, from my looks, from my success. It all comes from you. That is a major paradigm shift, and that is a major kind of pivot point that moves you away from pride to the opposite of that, which is humility.
Yeah. So in a very practical sense, one of the ways, we'll keep unpacking pride more, but we can tackle pride just very simply gratitude, just recognizing what's been given to us and being thankful for that. Like that being a practice, a habit in our life.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, gratitude, and then gratitude with the end point of God.
Yeah.
I think even if it's gratitude, man, I'm grateful for my marriage. And because
we can say we built it
because
ourselves,
I worked my butt off, and here's what I've done, And I'm not saying you haven't worked your butt off, but again, it's a slippery slope. It's this like it's like this fine little thread. It's like rat poison, 99% good food, 1% poison. It just seeps itself in there, and now all of a sudden pride is so sneaky. Pride begins to masquerade itself as like intellect. I'm just smart. It's not pride. I'm just smart, or it's intelligence, or, I'm just savvy, or I'm committed to excellence, and so, and a lot of times that's just like masquerading language for pride.
Yeah.
And I think it really does, like you're saying, gratitude is a way to combat that. But ultimately the big, fundamental shift is to go, not me, but God. God gave me these hands. God gave me the time and the place. God put me in this, moment, or gave me this opportunity. And I was responsible with that. But man, thank you, God, for giving me my value. Thank you, God, that I can wake up, and I said this on Sunday, look in the mirror and know I have value, not because of anything about me, but because you created me in your image. And now I have value as a result of that. Yeah. That's a really big paradigm shift, and moves you to a place of humility.
Yeah, for sure. Excuse me.
Are you all right over there?
Yeah, water went down the wrong pipe.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, even just going back to our conversation about the beach and the ocean, like it is humbling to stand 100%. On the edge of the ocean, because you go, oh, wow, I'm small. Like me, 500 yards out that way without, like, I'll die. Like my life is over. You know what I mean? Like the riptide and the waves and like, I mean, you could get saved and all that, but you get what I'm saying is we realize how small we are on the edge of something very big. And it's almost like gratitude in our life puts God before us in a way that it brings like the waves before us every single day. And it's reminding ourselves, oh, I'm small and God is a lot bigger.
And that's a wonderful, and it's a natural thing too. You can be an atheist or an agnostic and just go, be on a mountaintop and go, man, I'm so humbled.
Yeah.
Well, that's a natural thing to say because you've seen something bigger. Yep. And I would just say you're a few steps away from God. So if you just saw something bigger, imagine a God of an infinite universe who created all things. And that is like, oh my gosh, if he's that big, wow, I am humbled in his presence. That's why, humility begins with the fear of the Lord. The Proverbs talk about, In fact, I wrote it down. Proverbs 22:4 says, "Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life." Like, so humility is what puts the wind in the sails. Humility is what empowers you to be able to, own your piece of the past. Because that deep insecurity, which again has pride and humility woven in it, the deep insecurity inside of me to say, "Am I okay? Am I okay? Am I doing all right? Do I really have worth?" There's a really deep soulish insecurity. When you look at the mirror, if that's answered by look at what I've done, look at what I've accomplished, look at like me stuff, then you're going to remain insecure, because that stuff is on subtle sand. Like, the economy, boom, flashes, and now all of a sudden, a marriage, all of a sudden you never thought, your son or daughter, you never thought, all of a sudden your health, you never thought you'd be in this situation. Now the rug's been pulled out from under you, and now that insecurity is kind of fleshed out. Now you kind of see it like, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? If that insecurity is replaced with the security of your Heavenly Father, that is a major foundational piece. Because the reason why I don't want to apologize is because I'm insecure. The reason why I don't want to own my piece of the past is because my security is lacking. The more secure you are, in other words, it doesn't depend upon whether you see me one way or the other, or whether I accomplish this or not, or whether I have this title or this likes. I'm already good with God.
Yeah.
I'm already secure with God.
Yep.
I'm already have a right standing with God through Christ. All of a sudden now, I have the security and the empowerment to be able to go, so why not own my piece of the past? There's something bigger than me informing my value and worth, so it gives me the humility to be able to own my piece of the past. It's okay to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of opens the door to be less than in the eyes of the world, but far more than in the eyes of God.
Oh, I like the way you say that. See, that's another beach moment.
Oh, man.
That's just you over there.
Yeah, well, all right.
That's really good, though.
But yeah. I don't know. I just think that, well, I think I've quoted this a bunch on this podcast with the Brandon Manning quote from Ragamuffin Gospel, and he says, it remains a startling story to those who never understand. The men and women who are truly filled with light are those who have gazed deeply into the darkness of their imperfect existence. And it's those who are truly humble, those people that you sit on the other side of, and you're like, man, I can't offend you. Like, you're so secure. Your identity is just solid. They've just recognized that they're less than, and God is far greater, and they're just so at peace with that. And I remember my counselor gave me something. This is just like super practical potentially as it relates to trying to combat pride. Well, let me share one story first. I was sat down I think I've shared this before too, but I sat down in a counseling session, and I started talking, and he just said, man, Jeremy, Jesus would have been so grateful to know you. And it was just like, oh man, I am the Pharisee in the story, in a lot of ways. And but one of the things he encouraged me to say is, when I feel offended, when I feel attacked, or I feel like my pride is not, or I'm trying to keep my pride intact, is just to say to myself, you know what, it's probably actually worse than I think. And it's actually just, I'm probably actually worse than the perception of that person who's saying that about me, or, and it's like, oh yeah, because I'm in need of Jesus. I'm a sinner. I'm in need of the cross, and that's been a good handle for me, is just to go, you know what, it's probably worse. That's okay, because God's grace is big enough for it.
Yeah, 100%. And especially if there's a really deeper part of your soul where you do have that security, where you know what your heavenly, like the Psalms 139. I'm working on that with one of my sons. We had dinner last night, and he just has a lot of voices of shame in his head. And part of that, I told him, part of that's because I put that in you. It's my fault, son. And it was a really hard combo last night. And the other part, I said, you do have the ability to change your brain, change your way of thinking. And that's a gift God's given us. And it comes through repetition. And I said, Psalms 139 is a great verse that's been really freeing and liberating for me. And I think it's like verses 9 and 10 or 14 and 15 that just talk about, here's what I know. I know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I know that he's made me in a splendid way. I know that full well. I know that full well inside of me. And when you get to that place where that's just not a Bible verse, but that's my life, that's a deep part of my soul, and you can wake up and that is true of you, that begins to change the whole security aspect of your life. And it gives you a foundation then to be able to hear things that are far worse, as you're saying, than you suspect. And it's okay. Because, man, what an opportunity to learn. What an opportunity to get better. What an opportunity not to repeat. What an opportunity to adjust my sails and put wind in my sails if I'm able to listen and be curious about you. And I know there's a lot of words, but And this is really important. And it's an opportunity to filter out the junk you're going to put on me. Mm-hmm. You know, because as soon as I begin to open up maybe that feedback session, like I'm like, hey, Jeremy, I've asked you this pretty much every week. Mm-hmm. You know, hey, what's it like on the other side of me? You know, over the last week, have I done anything to, you know, hurt our trust? Have I done anything to disempower you? Have I done anything organizationally that you're like, Buck, you're off your rocker right now? Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes you may sit there, and I've never experienced this, but maybe you're grumpy, you know, or maybe you had a bad day, and maybe you're overly critical, and you're going to allow your junk to start to get on me. Mm-hmm. And there's a discernment piece of that to be able to discern what's going on, because once you open up that feedback, you need to have that discerning piece. Yeah. And at the exact same time, there are wonderful things you're giving me to help me see me clearly that really adjusts my sales and sets me free.
And it does put wind back in your sales.
Exactly.
When you can have that kind of security to experience that. Yeah.
So pride, humility, big things right there.
Yep. And just to recap some of the maybe practical things that people can take from that little, you know, tidbit on pride would just be practice of gratitude, you know, getting before God, being thankful to God for what's going on. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe you adopt my thing and say it's far worse than that. You know, when you feel like that defensiveness rises in you, or you feel offended by something, you say to yourself, you know, it's probably far worse than that. Mm-hmm. And then just another one I would add too, this is just I think it's maybe centuries old, but it's something called the Jesus prayer. And it could just be something you pray every day in your time with God. And it's, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Mm-hmm. And it's just a reminder that you're in need of mercy. You're in need of grace, you know, and that was once for all on the cross, and we believe that's true, but it's a daily reminder that we still need his grace, you know, in our lives each day and every moment. So there's some practical things people can do.
And if you're not a follower of God, I think one of the things, or not a follower of Christ, I think one of the greatest things you could do is just be curious. Pride keeps you from God. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, oh, that can't be true. Or, you know, just be curious. What if Jesus really is who he claimed to be? What if God really is, you know, the beginning and the end? What if he really is the one who knits you together and knows every hair on your head and is personal and relational and gives you value and worth?
Yeah.
What if that's true? Like, and I think that's the curiosity piece.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening or watching and you're not a follower, you're agnostic, or you have lots of questions, I think that's wonderful. And I would just say, when it comes to pride, one of the things you can do is just be curious.
Yeah. On that note too, I was listening to one of our kind of staff's favorite podcast this morning, the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And he's interviewing this guy, Sam Collier, I think is his name.
Yeah,
and I would imagine Sam is like maybe half of his age, or maybe just a little bit more than half. I don't know. But, you know, Carey's just brilliant, like lawyer, lead pastor, talks to all these amazing leaders. And Sam is talking about something, and Carey made a comment, and I was like, I love Carey. But Carey's like, man, Sam, like, I am taking notes right now. This is so helpful. This is so good. And I want to be like Carey when I'm his age. Like, I want to be learning, taking notes. Like, I want to be in that posture just to be like, I always need to learn. I always need to grow. That curiosity thing you're talking about.
Well, it's, yeah, and we could go on and on, but it keeps you from being cynical, being that old grumpy lady or that old grumpy man.
Yep.
Be curious, baby.
And Carey wrote a book on that, actually.
Yeah, I know. That's right. So we can keep going.
So he's practicing what he preached, which is great.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So how can we be satisfied with owning our piece? This is a big one. If the person on the other side of us doesn't or can't or won't own theirs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a really great question, and I think I've got two things that hit my mind. Number one is, the reason why it's a great question is because you're right. There is another part of the equation. If you draw your blame circle, you know, the circle of blame, and you carve out your piece of your past, well, then what do you do with the other big piece?
Right.
That's a major, major question. Now, to give you some hope and direction, we will talk about that in part 3. So we're going to address this.
They were spending an entire Sunday talking about this exact thing.
Because it is such a fair question. I mean, how in the world, if, again, back to our scenario, 90% was your fault, 10% my fault. Now, you know, our whole relationship's blown up. What, are you kidding me? I'm going to own my piece, and, you know, you're the one who hurt. Well, what do we do with that piece? That's a fair question. It's part of the series. So, you know, think about the series like a book, where in chapter 1, we have few chapters to go. We're going to answer that question. But I do think one of the questions we had to answer in this series is, we have to start somewhere. And we alluded to this earlier. So where do we start? I think one of the best places we could start is with you. Personal responsibility. Like, what is your piece of the pie? So we had to start somewhere. And that's why I was like, you know, you got to bring your piece of the pie to the table. You got to bring what you've done, to, you know, You got to own that. And I think to own that, as we've talked about, pride is going to be really important to deal with our pride. And that's going to require us to go, there's got to be something bigger than us. You know, for me to be able to swallow my pride, there's got to be something bigger. And that bigger thing, I would say, is God. And then I do think it's going to require, you know, I think owning that is, if you start with you and owning that, I think that is our way forward, but not our total way forward. So, again, I kind of lost my train of thought in that. So,
well, I was going to say, maybe think of there's a quote, I hope I don't butcher this, by Gabor Mate. I don't know how to say his name, but he studies like addiction and stuff like that and trauma. And in part 3 might hit on some of those more traumatic things that take wind out of our sails that could have happened decades ago, but today they're still taking wind out of our sails. And he says that trauma is not what happens to us; it's a result. It's a result of what happens in us because of what happened to us. And in a lot of ways, you know, the piece of the pie might be 99.9% theirs because of something horrible and traumatic, but the 0.1% is what we allowed to happen in us and what we've allowed to continue to happen in us as a result of what happened to us. And in a lot of ways, I think that is part 3. Like, we can't unpack all of that now.
Yeah,
but
and that's a big piece. And I just, as you were talking, you kind of got my train of thought back on the tracks because I was like, I just totally lost my train. But I think, so we have to start somewhere. And yes, the trauma, and yes, there are really big things that have happened, and we will talk about those. But the importance of the series and what we're talking about is how do you begin to adjust your sails, to put wind in your sails? So, okay, so what can we do? Well, as you own your piece of the pie, that's a really important piece because that's the kind of, internal locus of control. In psychology, it's like, hey, you're in a room, you feel stuck, I'm trapped, I'm not free, I have no direction, there's no wind in my sails, what can I do? Well, you need to first and foremost know the lock is on the inside of the handle. It's not on the outside, you're not locked in the room. So what can you do? Well, you own your piece. And here's why I would say it practically works out, even if the other person's not changing. That if you want to put wind in the sails of your marriage, you want to put wind in the sails of parenting, you want to put wind in the sails of finances or professional or whatever it is, or spiritually, by you owning your piece of the pie, you are like priming the pump. You are beginning to crack the door. You are beginning to say the lock's on the inside of the door, I'm going to open a little bit, and maybe there's a little bit of freedom, a little bit of fresh air that I can experience. And I gave an example with Jill and I were in a pickle in our relationship. The wind was out of our sails in our marriage. And if you heard the whole story, I think you would sit down and go like, Buck, there are a lot of things that feels like, in that specific scenario and circumstance happened to you. And so I could have easily played the card that, hey, it's all her fault, not my fault. If you heard the whole story, you'd probably go, well, Buck, I get it, man, hard things and all. But what I chose to do was what we're talking about, to say like, okay, my words are hurtful. And I continue to add fuel to the fire and continue to take wind out of our sails when I say, you're exhausting. I continue to take wind out of the sails when I would use superlatives and say, you always, you never. And then it's like any little effort she's trying, I can't recognize because I'm hurting. And I'm also using these big superlatives I'm unwilling to own that are keeping us trapped in our kind of relational state. And the idea that she's not listening, and the fact when I had to pause for a second and go, am I listening? Well, I'm not listening because I'm so hurt. And as a result of my hurt, I'm unwilling to listen. But she's actually saying things that are really helpful towards healing of what's going on in our relationship. Yeah. And I'm just telling you, if you looked at the whole piece of the pie, you would go, I get it, Buck. And it felt very unfair in the moment, but it was priming the door open for our relationship. It was putting some wind back in our sails. It was like allowing her to feel a little bit more safe. It was allowing her to feel a little bit more vulnerable. It was allowing like some truth and freedom to come into our relationship. And somebody had to go first. I hate the statement that I read in a book a long, long time ago about marriage. It says, what do you do when you're on this? There's zero wind in your sails and you're on this crazy cycle. Well, eventually the most mature person has to go first. And I hate that statement because I'm like, I want to be mature. Yeah. I want to just, be like, you hurt me, you hurt me, you hurt me. But that is your way forward. That is how you adjust your sails. And it does feel unfair. It is not emotionally satisfying. But you have to know the lock's on the inside of the doors. Somebody's got to go first. The most mature person is going to go first. And so why not give it a shot and maybe pry, the sails in a different direction and get some wind in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super good. To wrap up, I want to ask, just in all of this, what you just said, obviously I would imagine when the situations with Jill, you're inviting God into that, and you're really seeking Him in that, tackling our pride, really trying to own our piece of our past. It causes us, it forces us to go, God, I need help with this. So what are some ways we can invite God into owning our piece of the past?
Well, I do think you hit the nail on the head about these two questions. The last two questions are together. There are times you're going to own your piece of the past. You're going to I'm going to watch my words. I'm not going to use superlatives. I'm going to try to listen. What is she saying? I know she's trying to say something. Maybe she's not saying it the way I want her to say it, but she is saying something. But then you're not going to get the response you want. Maybe the wind's not going to get in your sails to the direction you want. So where do you go with that? And this is where, again, foundationally, if you have security, if God is your rock and your refuge, if He's your place of rest, it is so liberating and freeing. You're not alone. You're just not alone. You feel utterly alone in that relationship in that moment. But to know that you're not alone, to know that every second, every millisecond of the day, that the very Holy Spirit, who is God, is inside of you, who knows the will of God, who knows the direction, who's called the counselor. It's to take those things and bring them to God, to go, God, I feel crushed. I feel hopeless. God, I feel like I'm owning all the pieces of the pie and he or she is not owning any piece of the past. Can you meet me in this moment? Can you be my rock? Can you be my refuge? And a lot of times I would just, in my life, I would go away and I'd feel kind of defeated. I'd feel like, man, I'm putting all this energy, and I'd just have to open my palms and go in my room or go outside on the back porch and just say, God, can you meet me in these moments? And God would, in a multitude of ways. So I think one is to go to God. I think that, you can do that through prayer. You can just, ask God a question, open your hands, or just come to God and say, here's what's going on. He can handle those things. Yeah. I do think the other is just through the scriptures. I think one of the greatest ways God speaks is through the Bible. And this is why, we encourage, and I encourage people to read their Bible. I think this morning, I've got some relational tension in my household right now, which is just terrible when I'm doing a series about putting wind in your sails. And I'm like, good Lord, this is all going on. And I'm trying to teach and apply, teach and apply, teach and apply. And this morning I'm reading in Proverbs, which is where I'm spending time with God. And I wrote, here's what I read. It said, respond gently when you are confronted, and you will diffuse the rage of another. Responding with sharp, cutting words will only make it worse. Don't you know that being angry can ruin the testimony of even the wisest of men?
Wow.
And it's Proverbs 15, and I was like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. It's like, Buck, respond gently. Buck, responding with sharp. It was like the Lord was speaking to me. And so that's those moments that I'm like, goodness, this is why I want you to read your Bible. There's so many moments I'm having in life. And at the exact same time, when I actually open the Bible, it's like God speaks into those moments, and He uses the Bible to speak. So one of the greatest places is through the scriptures. And the last place I would just say is through one another. This is why I talk about counseling all the time. There are things I cannot see. I'm so emotionally spent. I'm so emotionally fired up. I'm so hurt that you can see things I cannot see. And this is why in Ecclesiastes 4, it talks about two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help them up, but pity anyone who falls and doesn't have anyone to help. This is where when I'm falling, I'm emotional. And when the wind's out of my sails, I'm emotional. And I need you to be able to be the wisdom that perhaps I don't have, or the insight or the self-awareness I don't have. And that insight is one of the insight you provide is one of the ways that God speaks to us, that you can say things that I need to hear.
Yeah, it's a mentor, a counselor, spiritual director.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and oftentimes, you've done it for me, I've done it for you, to where you'll reflect scripture to me, you'll reflect, the wisdom of God to me, and I'm like, man, I needed to hear that. And so I think through prayer, through just opening your palms, through the Bible, through, one another, are some of the greatest ways to be able to get that insight.
And so maybe even just asking someone who's maybe a bit further down the road, whether it is paying someone to listen to you, which is counseling in a lot of ways, but it's so beneficial, or just someone who has the kind of marriage or has the kind of spiritual life that you desire, and you just go, hey, will you just meet me for coffee and speak into some of these things or something like that? Just very practically. I mean, that's something that we can definitely do and apply that two are better than one piece.
And that's what I shared on Sunday, and I'll end with this. This is one of the coolest things about having like that spiritual director, that mentor, that counselor. When I shared the story at the beginning about, where Jill and I were, and I sat down with my counselor, I prefaced the whole meeting. I just said, hey, I'm going to share where I'm at. And can you then reflect back to me what you hear? Well, my ability to say, can you reflect back to me what you hear, was not because I'm like, ooh, strong. And it was because I was broken and my security was in God. And I was trusting that my security in God gave me the strength and the ability to be able to say, I need your feedback. I can't figure this out on my own. I'm stuck. I need help. And so I think to have somebody you can do that with, let me just tell you the narrative. I think hearing yourself, speaking it out loud, sharing your emotions. I'm pissed off, I'm mad, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm so discouraged, I feel hopeless. Hearing yourself say that is so therapeutic and helpful for your way to adjust your sales. But it also allows another person who has wisdom on the other side of you some insight to reflect some things perhaps you are doing that is your piece of the past that can adjust your sales.
Yeah. That's so good. Thank you for sharing, just part of you and Jill's, experience with that and your own and all that. I think it's so helpful for just all of us to get win back in our sales.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up there. Like you've alluded to and we've mentioned multiple times, this is really like a 3-hour conversation. 5-hour conversation that we have broken up into 5 parts throughout this series. And so make sure you're tuning in, because one part is not complete, because we're going to keep building on what it looks like to get win back in our sales. So be there on Sunday for part 2. Tune in online, grab a friend. We're excited for it, and we will see you there.
Thank you, man.